"And just what in the blazes do you think you're doing here, old-timer?" The sharp voice, filled with the kind of manufactured authority that only comes from a new officer fresh with eagles on his collar, cut through the dry Texas air. It belonged to Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man whose crisply pressed multicam uniform seemed like it had been printed on him that morning. His sunglasses reflected the stooped figure of the old man standing before him, a stark contrast to the shimmering heat waves rising from the concrete of the advanced marksmanship range. The old man, who could have been in his 70s or 80s, didn't flinch. He wore simple khaki pants and a faded blue work shirt, the kind you'd buy in a 3-pack at a hardware store, and his hands, weathered and spotted with age, rested on the handle of a long, well-worn leather case that looked more like something you'd find in an antique shop than carry on to one of the most technologically advanced sniper ranges in the U.S. Army. "I was invited," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, like stones settling in a slow-moving river. It carried a faint southern drawl, smoothed over by years of travel. Colonel Thorne let out a short, incredulous laugh, more of a bark than anything else. He gestured expansively with a hand clad in a sleek black tactical glove. "Invited to my range? This is the bleeding edge. We're testing integrated biometric feedback systems and ballistic computers that account for the Coriolis effect in real time. This isn't a place for show and tell with your granddaddy's hunting rifle." He pointed a rigid finger at the leather case. "Whatever is in that sarcophagus is a relic. You are a relic. You don't belong here." The old man's pale blue eyes, sharp and clear despite the network of wrinkles around them, never left the colonel's face. They held a profound calmness, a stillness that absorbed the colonel's aggressive energy without reflecting any of it back. He offered no defense, no argument. He simply stood there, a silent, weathered stone in the path of a rushing stream. A few feet behind him, Specialist Davis, a young soldier barely 21, felt a hot flush of shame rise in his neck. His job that day had been simple: escort Mr. Elias Vance from the main gate to the Talon Range for an observation visit, a request flagged by base command as VIP. Looking at the quiet old man in his worn clothes, Davis had assumed there was some mistake, but now, watching his commanding officer berate the visitor, Davis felt a knot of unease tighten in his gut. This felt wrong, profoundly, fundamentally wrong. "Let me see your identification and invitation," Thorne demanded, snapping his fingers. The old man Elias slowly reached into his back pocket. His movements were deliberate and economical, without a single wasted motion. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, darkened with age, and extracted a laminated ID card and a folded, yellowed piece of paper. He handed them to the colonel, who snatched them from his hand and glanced at the paper first. It was an old authorization letter, typed on a machine and dated nearly 20 years prior, an open-ended invitation to observe training at any U.S. Army marksmanship facility, signed by a general whose name Thorne vaguely recognized as long retired. "This is ancient," Thorne scoffed, waving the paper dismissively. "This is probably not even valid anymore." "It's still valid," Elias said, his voice still quiet, still calm. It was a statement of fact, not a plea. Thorne's eyes narrowed as he examined the ID card, which displayed an old civilian contractor credential. The photo showed a younger version of the man before him, his face leaner but with the same piercing eyes. The name read Vance Elias, and underneath, where a clearance level should have been, was only a string of asterisks and a cryptic code that Thorne had never seen before. It wasn't standard. It wasn't anything he recognized from his 2 decades of service, likely some outdated, meaningless code from a forgotten era. Holding up the card for the handful of young snipers and instructors who had paused their training to watch the confrontation, Thorne sneered, "Athena, what's that supposed to mean? You part of the base gardening club?" The younger soldiers chuckled, nervously, their eyes darting between their arrogant commander and the stoic old man. Specialist Davis felt his jaw clench. The disrespect was palpable, hanging thick in the air like the suffocating Texas heat. "It means I served," Elias said simply. Thorne tossed the ID and the letter back at Elias's chest. The old man caught them with a slow, steady hand, carefully placing them back into his wallet. The colonel stepped closer, invading Elias's personal space, his voice dropping to a menacing growl meant to intimidate. "Listen to me very carefully, old man. I am the commander here. My authority is absolute. This range is for the elite. The future of American warfare, not for has-beens and never-weres to wander around on some nostalgic trip. My men are qualifying on the new XM2010 platform at 1,500 meters today. We don't have time for your stories about shooting squirrels with a musket. So you're going to take your little suitcase and your expired paperwork, and you are going to leave. Am I clear?" The sun beat down, the only sound the distant hum of the range's ventilation systems, and the light tinkling of a shell casing ejected by a sniper. Elias Vance, however, didn't move. His gaze swept over the range, past the high-tech rifles on their tripods, the complex optics, and the laptops displaying atmospheric data. He saw the young soldiers, their faces taut with concentration, their bodies encased in the latest gear. And he saw the target, a small steel plate shimmering like a mirage at 1,500 meters. He didn't flinch. His silence was an answer in itself. A quiet refusal that was more infuriating to Thorne than any shouted defiance could have been. It was the silence of a man who had faced down far worse than a puffed-up officer with an ego to protect. Thorne's face flushed red. "Did you hear me? I gave you an order." He jabbed a finger toward the gate. "Get out." Elias finally met Thorne's furious gaze, his pale blue eyes steady. "That target," he said softly, his voice clear in the tense silence. "The one at 1,500. Your boys are having trouble with the wind shift past the 1,000-meter mark." It wasn't a question, it was another statement of fact. Thorne was taken aback. It was true. A subtle crosswind was causing the rounds to drift unpredictably in the last third of their flight path. His data analysts were still trying to model it. "What would you know about it?" Thorne snapped, recovering his bluster. "You can probably barely see the target, BM, let alone the plate." "I see it," Elias said. Then, breaking his statue-like stillness, he knelt down with a slight groan, unlatched the old leather case, and opened it with a sound like old bones cracking. The soldiers leaned in, curious to see the so-called museum piece. Thorne crossed his arms, a smug, mocking smile spreading across his face. "Oh, this should be good. Let's see it, Grandpa. Let's see the weapon that won the revolution." Elias folded back the top of the case, revealing a rifle nestled inside on a bed of faded red velvet. It wasn't a musket, as Thorne had expected. It was a modified M14, its wooden stock dark and smooth with decades of oil from handling. The steel of the barrel and receiver was a deep burnished gunmetal gray, worn but immaculately clean, an M21 sniper weapon system, the very first generation. Mounted on top was a simple fixed-power scope, its body showing the dings and scratches of hard use. It was a beautiful rifle, not in a shiny new sense, but in the way a well-used, perfectly maintained tool is beautiful. It was an artifact, but a living one. A few of the younger snipers, students of history, recognized it and exchanged wide-eyed glances. That wasn't just any old rifle. That was a legend. Thorne, however, was unimpressed. His world was one of polymers, carbon fiber, and adjustable everything. "A wooden stock," he scoffed. "Good heavens. Does it run on steam? I bet that thing warps if you so much as breathe on it too hard. My men have rifles with chassis systems that cost more than your car, old man. Their scopes can calculate the spin of the earth." Elias ran a gnarled finger along the stock, his touch gentle, reverent. "This one doesn't warp," he said, his voice distant. "She's stable. She's seeing worse than a little Texas sun. The familiar weight and balance of the rifle, the feel of the wood beneath his fingers, pulled him back in time. The harsh sunlight of the range faded, and the mocking voice of Thorne dissolved into a humid, buzzing silence. The Texas heat was gone, replaced by the suffocating wet warmth of a jungle. The air was thick with the smell of rotten rain, of mud and fear. Elias was 25 again, his body a whipcord of lean muscle, his face painted in green and black. He was lying on his belly in a nest of ferns on a hillside, the same M21 in his hands. Below him, in a clearing shattered by artillery, a platoon of American soldiers was caught in a brutal lull-shaped ambush. Green tracers from enemy machine guns streaked through the air, chewing up the earth around them. The platoon was pinned down, cut to pieces. His radio crackled with a frantic voice, a young lieutenant. "Ghost, this is Lancer 6. We're taking heavy fire from that ridgeline. East, 2 guns, maybe 3. We can't move, we can't see them. Can you see them?" The lieutenant's voice crackled through the radio, but Elias didn't answer. He was already working, his eyes unblinking, scanning the dense wall of jungle across the valley. 1,000 meters, maybe more. An impossible distance in this foliage. He wasn't looking for a person. He wasn't looking for a person. He was looking for a flicker of movement, a patch of leaves trembling where it shouldn't, a wisp of gun smoke that didn't belong. Nothing. "Ghost, do you copy? We're getting torn apart." The lieutenant's voice pleaded, cracking under the strain. Elias's breathing was slow, so slow it barely disturbed the air. He exhaled half a breath and held it, his world narrowing to the circle of his scope. He wasn't thinking. He was feeling this subtle shift in the wind as it moved down the valley, the heavy humidity that would drag on his bullet. He let his instincts, honed by 1,000 shots and 100 missions, take over. And then he saw it, not a muzzle flash, not a man but a single vibrant orchid, a splash of purple on a tree branch, clipped by a stream of invisible bullets coming from a spot 20 feet to its left. The enemy gunner was dug in deep, completely concealed, but betrayed by the path of his own fire. Elias adjusted his aim, not based on calculation, but on a deep, primal understanding of ballistics and environment. He factored in the wind. He couldn't feel the drop, but he could imagine it. His finger rested on the trigger. The world went silent. Only his heartbeat, the rifle, and the tiny unseen point in the jungle 1,000 meters away. He pressed the trigger. The M21 bucked against his shoulder, a familiar solid kick. He was already working the action, eyes never leaving the scope, watching for the impact. A heartbeat later, he saw a small puff of bark fly from a tree just above where he'd aimed. The stream of green tracers from that position stopped. "One down," he whispered to himself. The lieutenant's voice came back, laced with awe. "Jesus, did you see that? One of the guns just stopped. I don't know how, but it just stopped." Now Elias had a reference. He scanned for the second gun, hearing its rhythmic thumping. Applying the same logic, the same instinct, he saw a vine sway unnaturally. He aimed, breathed, and fired. The second gun went silent. The pressure on the platoon eased. They could move, fight back. Over the next 10 minutes, Elias methodically, patiently, located and silenced 2 more enemy positions. He was a phantom, an invisible hand of death reaching across the valley. He didn't just save the platoon. He broke the ambush. "Ghost, Lancer 6, we're clear. Whoever you are, thank you." The young lieutenant's voice was shaky, filled with reverence, bordering on worship. Elias didn't respond. He simply faded back into the jungle, his work done. Decades later, he would recall the name of that young Lieutenant Maccabee. "I said, are you deaf as well as senile?" Colonel Thorne's voice crashed back into Elias's consciousness. He blinked, and the green jungle dissolved, replaced by the bleached-out Texas landscape. He was kneeling on the hot concrete, hands still resting on the rifle stock. The faces staring down at him mixed mockery, pity, and dawning curiosity. "No, Colonel," Elias replied, his voice calm, returning to its placid state. "I'm not deaf." Thorne's patience, already worn thin, snapped. "That's it. You're done. You're a hazard." "Specialist Davis!" Thorne barked. "Sir," Davis snapped to attention, his face pale. "Escort this man off my range. If he resists, you are authorized to use the necessary force. I want him gone now." Thorne turned his back, dismissing Elias with a gesture, preparing to walk away, ending the embarrassing spectacle. But Elias wasn't finished. "Colonel," he called out, his voice cutting through the air, stopping Thorne in his tracks. Thorne turned slowly, his eyes blazing with fury. "What?" he demanded. "That 1,500-meter shot?" Elias asked, looking toward the distant target. "I can make it." A wave of shocked silence fell over the range. Even Thorne was momentarily speechless. His own elite snipers, using rifles that were the pinnacle of modern engineering with advanced optics and ballistic computers, had been struggling all morning. Only about 1 in 5 shots had connected with the steel plate, and this old man with his wooden rifle and ancient scope was claiming he could make the shot. Thorne's shock quickly curdled into derisive laughter. "You can make it with that thing?" He gestured at the M21. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. The barrel's probably shot out. The scope probably can't even see that far. You're delusional." "Just one shot," Elias said. He wasn't asking. He was stating his intention. The challenge hung in the air. For Thorne, it was a golden opportunity. The old man would try and fail spectacularly. It would be the ultimate humiliation, a perfect lesson for his young soldiers on the foolishness of relying on old ways and the superiority of their new technology. It would vindicate Thorne's arrogance. "Fine," Thorne said, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "Fine, you want to embarrass yourself? Be my guest. In fact, let's make it interesting." He turned to the assembled group. "Everybody listen up. This gentleman, Mr. Vance, believes he can hit the 1,500-meter target with this antique in one shot." He turned back to Elias. "You get 1 round. That's it. When you miss, and you will miss, you will be detained by the MPs for trespassing and creating a disturbance on a live-fire range. Do we have a deal?" Elias gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "1 shot is all I need." Specialist Davis watched, his heart pounding. This was going too far. This was more than just arrogance. It was cruelty. He looked at Elias's faded ID, which he had picked up when Thorne tossed it. Vance, Elias. The name tickled at his memory. He had heard old-timers at the NCO club mention it in hushed, reverent tones, usually after a few beers. A name connected to half-believed stories of impossible shots and shadowy operations. A ghost, a legend. As Elias calmly reached into a small leather pouch on his belt and extracted a single hand-loaded cartridge, Davis made a decision. He stepped back from the group, pulling out his personal cell phone. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. He found the number he was looking for, Sergeant Major Reynolds, the command sergeant major for the entire base. Davis had met him once during a charity event, and Reynolds had told him, "If you ever see something truly wrong, something an officer is doing that dishonors this uniform, you call me directly." Davis had thought it was just a line. Today, he was going to find out. He pressed the call button, turning his back to the drama unfolding on the firing line. The phone rang once, twice. "Reynolds," a gruff voice answered. "Sergeant Major, this is Specialist Davis from the AMU," Davis said, his voice low and urgent. "I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but we have a situation down at the Talon Range." "What kind of situation, Specialist?" "It's Colonel Thorne, sir. He's about to humiliate a civilian visitor, an old man. He's forcing him to take an impossible shot to embarrass him, and he's threatening to have him arrested. There was a pause. A civilian visitor? We don't have any scheduled for the Talon range today, except... Hold on. Davis could hear the rustling of papers. I have one name here, open-ended pass from the Department of the Army. A Mr. Elias Vance. Is that your man? Yes, Sergeant Major. That's him, Davis said, relief flooding his voice. The colonel is treating him like dirt. Sir, this feels wrong. The man is old. A veteran. I think he's got this old rifle. Wait, Reynolds's voice cut in, sharp and alert. What name did you say? Vance, sir. Elias Vance. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. It stretched for a full 5 seconds. When Reynolds spoke again, his voice was tight with a tension that bordered on panic. Specialist, listen to me very, very carefully. What is Colonel Thorne's current disposition toward Mr. Vance? He's mocking him, sir. He's got the whole unit watching. He called his rifle a museum piece. He just threatened to have him arrested. A string of curses exploded from the other end of the line, so loud that Davis had to pull the phone away from his ear. Son, you need to stall him. Do whatever it takes. Trip him, fake a seizure. I don't care. Do not let that colonel touch Mr. Vance. Do you understand me? Stall him. Sir, I don't... Specialist. Reynolds's voice was a thunderclap. You've just called in an Olympus is falling emergency. Do you know who Elias Vance is? No, of course you don't. He was building a mental picture of the bullet's 1,500-meter journey. Feeling the subtle crosswind that Thorne's advanced wind meters struggled to quantify. Sensing it on the hairs of his arm as he knew exactly what it would do. He opened his eyes, serene, and settled his gaze behind the old scope, his cheek finding the worn spot on the stock molded to his face after thousands of hours. His world narrowed to the tiny shimmering rectangle of the target plate, and with half a breath, his body stilled. The range was silent. Even Thorne halted, caught up in the ritual, the only sound being the whisper of the wind. Then the M21 cracked, a deep, resonant boom, unlike the sharp roar of modern rifles. The rifle pushed back into Elias's shoulder as he absorbed the recoil, every eye on the range straining for the target, every ear listening for the impact. For 2 long seconds, there's only the echo of the shot. Then a faint ping, a 168-grain boat tail hitting hardened steel at nearly a mile. A gasp went through the crowd as soldiers grabbed scopes and binoculars, one yelling in disbelief, "Dead center." It's a dead center hit. Impossible. Specialist Davis, watching through a scope, saw the perfect shot, a black pockmark centered on the steel plate. A 1-in-a-million shot made with an old rifle. Unknown ammunition, no spotter, and in a tricky wind. By a man everyone had written off. It wasn't just a good shot, it was a perfect shot that shouldn't have. It proves nothing, he muttered, striding toward Elias, who calmly worked the bolt to eject the spent casing. Elias picked it up and placed it in his pouch. You're finished here, Thorne roared, his anger swelling. He reached for Elias's arm, intending to haul him up, but Specialist Davis interjected. Let go of him, sir, stepping forward before he could stop himself. Thorne turned on him. You're relieved, Specialist. Get out of my sight. As Thorne turned back to Elias, his hand raised, about to strike or shove the old man, the sky erupted. A low thump grew into a deafening roar as 2 Black Hawk helicopters swept in low and fast, landing with precision near the firing line, rotor wash kicking up dust. The base alarm blared. Warning, warning, all personnel cease training. Stand by for instructions. Every soldier froze, staring in bewilderment. Colonels didn't get visits from Blackhawks. The lead helicopter's door slid open, and out stepped General Maccabee. the commander of all Army Forces Command. Flanked by his Sergeant Major and MPs, Thorne's face drained of color, his mind racing. Unable to process the situation, why was the Forsicom commander landing on his range? Was this a drill? General Maccabee did not acknowledge Colonel Thorne or the salutes of the other officers as his cold, granite eyes scanned the scene and landed on Elias Vance, still kneeling. With a posture defying his 50-plus years, Maccabee marched across the concrete, past Thorne as though he were furniture, and stopped in front of Elias, who was stiffly rising. The entire range held its breath. General Maccabee, commander of over 750,000 soldiers, looked at the old man in the faded workshirt before performing the sharpest, most perfect salute of his career, filled with deep respect. "Mr. Vance," McCabe's voice boomed, clear and full of awe. "It's an honor to see you again, sir." Elias looked at the general, recognizing him faintly, the memory of a terrified young lieutenant's voice from decades ago flickering in his mind. He gave a simple nod. "Lieutenant Maccabee, you've done well for yourself," he replied softly. Colonel Thorne, his world flipped upside down, finally found his voice. "General Maccabee, sir, I don't understand. This man was causing a disturbance on my range. He's a civilian trespassing with unauthorized." Maccabee turned his head slowly, his eyes filled with such cold fury that Thorne's words died in his throat. Maccabee didn't raise his voice, but his low, deadly tone was more terrifying than any shout. "Colonel Thorne," he began, dripping with contempt, "you are the commander of the Army's Advanced Marksmanship Unit, correct?" "Yes, General," Thorne stammered. "Then, of all people, you should know your history," Maccabee continued, his voice deadly calm. "You stand on a range named for heroes, teaching a skill perfected by legends. And yet, you have the audacity to not recognize the man who wrote the book, the man who defined the very doctrine you pretend to master." Maccabee gestured toward Elias. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Thorne managed a weak, "His name is Vance, sir." He had some old contractor ID, his voice squeaking pathetically. Maccabee let out a humorless laugh. "His name is Elias Vance. To the men whose lives he saved, he was known by another name. They called him the Ghost of the A Valley, a name spoken in whispers because his existence was classified. A name that made entire enemy divisions reroute their patrols." Maccabee stepped closer to Thorne, eyes boring into him. "This old man holds the record for the longest confirmed kill in a combat zone with an iron-sighted rifle, a record he set in 1968, still classified to this day. He pioneered the techniques of high-angle shooting in mountainous terrain and reading wind over deep valleys, techniques that are now standard chapters in your own training manuals. He field-tested, perfected, and was the very first operator to deploy with the weapon system you just called a museum piece." Maccabee pointed at the M21 on the ground. "That isn't just an M21, Colonel. That's serial number 0001, the very first one ever made. It was presented to him by the Chief of Staff of the Army as a personal gift when he retired from a career so secret that most of it is still locked in a vault 100 feet beneath the Pentagon." A murmur swept through the young snipers, who were now looking at Elias not as an old man, but as a living legend of their craft. "The clearance code on his ID that you mocked," Maccabee continued, his voice relentless. "Athena. It doesn't stand for the gardening club. It's a retired designation that grants him unrestricted access to any U.S. military facility at any time, with the authority to advise or correct any commanding officer, including a 4-star general. An authority that has never been rescinded." Thorne looked like he might be sick, his face ashen, his body trembling. He looked at Elias, this quiet, unassuming old man, and saw not a relic, but a figure of immense, terrifying stature. "And you, Colonel," McCabe's voice dropped even lower, becoming a venomous whisper, "not only disrespected him, but you put your hands on him. The general's gaze flickered to Thorne's raised hand, still frozen in air. "For your information, Colonel, in 1969, a North Vietnamese general made the mistake of getting too close to Elias Vance's position, and Mr. Vance took him out from over 2,200 meters through dense jungle during a monsoon. That shot saved my entire platoon from being overrun," General Maccabee said, his voice thick with emotion as he looked at Elias. "I was the lieutenant on the radio that day, calling for a miracle, and this man is the one who answered." He turned his attention back to Colonel Thorne. "This man holds the Medal of Honor," he continued. "It was awarded in a classified ceremony, and he is not permitted to wear it, but he has it. He has it for the actions that saved my life and the lives of 32 other men. And you, in your ignorance and arrogance, were about to strike him." The weight of McCabe's words crushed Thorne. His authority, career, and sense of self crumbled in that moment. He was no longer a proud commander, but a small foolish boy who had been caught tormenting a giant. "General, I didn't know," Thorne whispered, his words catching in his throat. The most pathetic defense imaginable, and he knew it. "You didn't know," Maccabee repeated, his voice cold and devoid of sympathy. "That's the entire point, Colonel. You judged a man by his clothes and his age. You put your faith in technology and data and forgot that the single most important weapon on any battlefield is the heart and mind of the warrior holding the rifle. You forgot the meaning of respect. You are not fit to lead soldiers. You are not fit to wear this uniform." The general's voice rose to a command tone that cracked like a whip. "Colonel Thorne, you are hereby relieved of your command of the Advanced Marksmanship Unit. Effective immediately, you will report to my aide. You will be escorted to your quarters to pack your personal belongings. A full inquiry into your conduct will commence at 1500 hours. Your career in the United States Army is over. Dismissed." Thorne stood there for a moment, swaying as if struck, then his shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, he turned and shuffled away, escorted by one of the generals. The range was silent except for the idling engines of the Blackhawks. General Maccabee turned back to Elias, his face softening from granite fury to deep gratitude. "Mr. Vance, Eli, I'm sorry. I am so sorry for the disrespect you were shown today." Elias simply shook his head and looked at the retreating figure of Colonel Thorne. There was no triumph in his eyes, only quiet sadness. "He's just a boy, General," he said softly. "A proud boy who has never been properly humbled. Don't ruin him. Teach him." Maccabee was stunned by Elias's capacity for grace. After everything, after the insults and threats, the old man's first instinct was forgiveness. It was a lesson more powerful than any rifle shot. "He needs to learn that rank gives you authority," Elias continued, his voice like a grandfather imparting wisdom. "But your actions earn you respect." He only understood the first part. The second part is more important. Maccabee nodded slowly, absorbing the profound lesson. "You're right, of course. I'll have him reassigned to a training depot, somewhere he can learn from the ground up what it means to be a soldier again." "Good," Elias said. He bent down and began placing his rifle back into its worn leather case, his movements slow and deliberate. "Eli," Maccabee said, stopping him. "What you did today, ... That shot. Even after all these years, how?" Elias paused, his hand on the cool steel of the rifle. "The tech changes, General, the rifles, the scopes, the bullets, but the fundamentals don't. The wind is still the wind. Gravity is still gravity. And a calm heart and a steady hand are still what matter most." The boy forgot that. He put his faith in the machine, not the man. Elias closed the case with a soft click and stood up, his joints creaking a little. "I appreciate the visit, General, but I think I'm done here for today." That evening, the story of what had happened on the Talon Range spread like wildfire across the base. Becoming an instant legend, The arrogant colonel and the quiet old man. The impossible shot. The arrival of the 4-star general. This was a story of humility, respect, and the hidden greatness often found in the quietest, most unassuming people. 2 days later, a humbled former Colonel Thorne was packing the last of his books into a cardboard box in his now barren office when there was a soft knock on the door. Thorne looked up to see Elias Vance standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. Thorne immediately stood, his posture ramrod straight. "Mr. Vance, sir," he said. Elias walked in and handed him a cup. "Just Eli," he said. "Figured you could use this." They stood in silence for a moment, sipping the coffee. Thorne couldn't meet the old man's eyes. "Sir," he began, his voice thick with shame. "There are no words to express how sorry I am. My behavior was inexcusable. I was arrogant, and I was wrong, completely and utterly wrong." Elias looked at him, his pale blue eyes holding no malice, only a kind of weary understanding. "You're a good officer, Marcus. You're smart. You're dedicated. But you fell in love with the tools and forgot about the craftsman. It happens." Thorne's voice was quiet as he continued, "I'm being reassigned to a basic training company at Fort Jackson. I'll be teaching recruits how to march and fold their socks." It was the ultimate fall from grace. "Good," Elias said, and Thorne flinched, expecting more scorn. But Elias's tone was gentle. "There is no better place to remember that every great soldier starts as a scared kid who needs to be taught. Not just how to shoot, but how to see, how to listen, and how to respect. You go there and you teach those kids. And more importantly, you let them teach you. You learn their names. You learn their stories. You'll be a better man for it, a better leader." Tears welled in Thorne's eyes. He had expected condemnation, but instead, he received grace. He had been given a second chance by the very man he had tried to destroy. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "I will." Within a month, a new directive signed by General Maccabee himself was issued throughout the Army. It established a new mandatory course for all officers in leadership positions. It was called the Advanced Program for Foundational Leadership. The course focused not on technology or strategy, but on military history, the importance of mentorship, and the core values of humility and respect. And on rare occasions, at ranges and training facilities across the country, a quiet old man in a faded blue work shirt would appear carrying a worn leather case. He would watch the young soldiers, and when a leader forgot the most important lessons, he would be there, a living legend, to offer a quiet reminder. The story of that day on the Talon Range became a cornerstone of that teaching, a powerful reminder that true strength isn't measured by rank or technology, but by character, and that the greatest heroes are often the ones you would never notice. It's a lesson that resonates far beyond the military, a truth for anyone who has ever judged a book by its cover. And if you believe in the power of such stories, stories of hidden greatness and earned respect, you should subscribe for more, because these are the legends that shape us.